So ladies and gentlemen, on that note, this growing phenomena, of course, can be explained in deep through our next topic of discussion. We're talking about the role of DPI in unlocking potential for financial inclusion. We're extremely elated that we have with us our eminent speakers joining us. First up, with a warm round of applause, our moderator, MD and CEO, Protean eGov Technologies, Mr. Suresh Sethi. Let's give Mr. Sethi a warm, warm round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us today. Also joining him right now would be our Director, Industry Solutions, Security and Networking, Google Cloud, Mr. Kiran Kumar Kesavarapu. Thank you, sir, for your valuable time. And of course, we will be shortly joined in the next few minutes by the CTO of Step, Dr. Pramod Varma. He's going to be joining us shortly, but can we have a warm round of applause for our queue? And then, of course, we'll wait his arrival. Mr. Sethi, he might be joining us in the next few minutes. Perfect. So with that, I'll leave it open to your discussion start.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I think nice and early today with all the rain outside. Good to see everybody in the room. So we're just waiting for Pramod, I think, but Kiran and I will kickstart at least to put the context to the session. So I think as you all know that whatever we are seeing around today, the proliferation in the fintech industry, a lot of credit goes to the creation of the underlying digital public infrastructure. I think India is stressed with DPI started with the foundational layer of Aadhaar. And from there, we went on to build the complete India stack. It was a build-up from there, and therefore came the payments layer, the data layer as we see it today, and this is now proliferating into multiple industries. So my question, I would start with Kiran to say that you've been again closely involved in seeing some of the current new ecosystems that are getting created after the identity and the data layer. We are now looking at digital commerce. We are looking at other areas coming up. So from your experience, Kiran, any view on how can adoption be catalyzed? How can we make this DPI more relevant and faster to adopt? And any experiences you would like to share from your views in India and globally what Google has been doing?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Suresh. We're discussing a subject that perhaps has touched all of our lives, right? So the best way to answer the question that Suresh has asked is to respond to it through the lens of us as consumers of DPI, right? Whether it is Aadhaar, whether it is any of the protocols that we all use in citizen services. From our standpoint, we would like to see three things. Number one, anything that we consume should be secure. I'm, after all, trusting the network to manage my data, my personal information in a privacy respected manner and is secure enough. And that's the first part, right? If there is no trust in the network, then I as a citizen would perhaps use less and less of it and not more and more of it. So to me, security is perhaps the most foundational, non-negotiable component as far as scaling of a DPI goes. The second aspect is scale. It's not good enough for public infrastructures to serve a few individuals. By design, by definition, they are meant to serve populations at scale. And obviously, when we're talking about public infrastructure for a country like India, we would expect that the infrastructure scales for 1 billion plus citizens. So I want each one of us, every countryman, to be served by the infrastructure, and therefore there is a whole lot of technology that comes into play. The third part, and I'm borrowing very liberally from the employer that I represent, Google. Ever since we were born as a company, we have respected the fact that you got to look at technology through the lens of a user, right? So the philosophy of respect the user is paramount in how you design public infrastructures, because that will simplify the consumption of the infrastructure. We are not building, I mean, if you think about it, you're not building a super highway in the physical world for a fancy looking road. You want it to be there because you can drive a car fast enough on it, right? And it is secure enough to be driven on it. And the same analogy perhaps holds true in the digital world, the digital infrastructure, right? I want it to be solving for a purpose that is meant for me, and therefore it needs to be perhaps, and we are contextualizing this to the country of 1 billion people here, it needs to be driven by voice, video, vernacular, as opposed to it being driven by a consideration that is not meeting the user requirements. So just to sort of lay out the three principles, we spoke about security as a foundational element for going deep and expanding public infrastructures. Number 2, scale. And number 3, the whole purpose of looking at DPI through the lens of a user, and therefore respecting how the user wants to interact with services that are built on top of DPI. At the end of the day, what is DPI's purpose? To provide an inclusive society, right? I mean, if you humanize the technology, it's all about making sure that we are touching the lives of everyone in the country and delivering digital transformation that can be consumed by all of them, right? So the three components that we spoke about: security, scalability, and making sure that we are respecting the user requirements. Good morning, Dr. Varma.
Thank you, Kiran, and good to have you, Pramod, over here. So you just started out by talking your favorite subject. So you've been the moving force behind all the foundational IDs that we have today. The foundational ID, the India stack. So what I was asking Kiran was, how do you fast pace it? How do you increase adoption of these rails? And we are seeing the proliferation of fintech industry over here, and India is the poster child today of digital public infrastructure. So wanted to get a sense from you that as you look around, India has achieved a lot. What are, over a period of time, I think for you, almost over a decade of learning, if you can condense it and share with us, what are the do's and don'ts, what are the universal principles which you found work well, and how would you see other countries adopting it? Because it is right at the center of G20 as we speak, where we are talking about saying we want to bring this to the world. So your views on that?
Yeah, apologies for walking in. The previous session ran a little bit late, and I was telling him it's possible that I'm going to literally rush in to this place. Really sorry. Sorry, Kiran. Yeah. So it's DPI. We walked into this as we did Aadhaar, and somewhat the identity project and beyond Aadhaar. I think the early days of that, 2013-14, is when the initial ideas about DPI thinking formed in our head, frankly. It came from the learning of how we did Aadhaar. And that also, essence, it was the creation of the principles. So you have to think about what is digitization, what is DPI, how is DPI different from traditional digitization. That's actually key to understand. Because digitization has been going on. What's the big deal? We have been digitizing banks, we have been digitizing various systems, and of course during internet, the large companies like Google, Amazon, and everybody showed digital can dramatically change the lives of people and how we interact. Or Ubers of the world, or reimagined everything, right? Literally in front of our eyes. So the digitization though, if you look at digitization in the government, traditionally it ran through an RFP process. So somebody would decide, I want to digitize my food delivery system or a payment system or healthcare system. And they would think about the whole solution. They would think about what they want to do. It's like you're like a product person. You know, you are the builder of the whole system. And hence you have to think about what are the underlying capabilities, what are the features that you need to build, what are all the user interfaces you have to build, what are the processes and workflows you have to build, and how do you roll it out, how do you get the entire what's called a full stack thinking. right? But the difficulty there was twofold. One, governments typically do not have the capacity to build and sustain. And they find it really hard to actually maintain that because their traditional RFP process restricts them from changing 1 year later, 2 years later, oh, we send something new. So imagine you started a project in 2007 and 2008 iPhone was launched, or 2006. Halfway through your project, an entire new innovation, iPhone, and then a year later Android literally came in. Smartphones hit the world. So the question we were asking is that you cannot predict the future. You have no idea in the speed of disruption that's going on. So how can you give a 5-year long solution all written up upfront in the RFP and choose a vendor and hope that damn thing is going to stay alive, right? Never happens. Not even single project in the last 12 years, government project I've gone through, where we were able to write everything we wanted upfront. Obviously, because we can't predict the future, we have no idea what's going on. We don't even know how the users are going to go. It's like our private product company saying, I already know exactly all the features for the product for the next 5 years. Then you are an idiot, right? You have no idea what's going to happen. So obviously your features will throw it, users might not use it, they'll throw it out, they won't like it. You have to continuously agile think. How do you write an RFP? So the DPI thinking brought a different way of approaching this problem. We said government should look at only infrastructure building, build only the underlying open specification or lightweight rails of sort or building blocks of sort. That's it. Don't think about the whole solutioning. And this also meant Kiran's earlier point, the scale. The scale doesn't come from because government decided to roll out with one app UPI across the country, right? It wouldn't happen. It's because Google Pays and Phone Pays and everybody stepped in the game, said we will solve that problem if only you create the rails, because that allows them to now run faster, innovate faster. It also brought few things very much changed the game. That government now can do very little, very minimalistic systems, because interoperability is not a natural thing for a private ecosystem. We need to understand that it is not natural. They might interoperate for their own platform's sake, but it's not interoperable for the larger sake, because moat, if I am an entrepreneur, that's what I would do. I have to build my own moat, right? There's no choice. That's how we grow. So interoperability, like TCP/IP thinking or HTTP thinking, has to happen outside somewhere. And including all the private ecosystem, we can create common specification together. In fact, Google was one of the first to help us out when UPI was built. Even earliest days of specification building, there were volunteers who were actually looking at it and say, you know, I would give you feedback and so on. They were not controlling it, they were giving feedback, and we reached out to everyone for feedback right at that time, because private ecosystem know what's really going on. But once the spec is out, that's it. The private companies now, we are doing the same thing for healthcare. We are doing the same thing for education. We are doing the same thing for ONDC, the open network. What is ONDC doing? There is no software. There is just protocol and a way of creating a network effect through private innovation. So public rail, private innovation is where the DPI differed. And that is essentially the learning. Learning is that create interoperability, create really minimalistic rails, allow innovation to thrive, it creates competitive market, it creates innovation to thrive, and it allows evolvability, because we don't know what the future holds us for, and it beautifully works well for India, where we also have a problem with diversity and scale. Because one app won't work for 1 billion people, as simple as that. So diversity of language, diversity of culture, diversity of capability, diversity of education. So you need lots of solutions. That works beautifully. So DPI, that's pretty much it. It's actually a simple story. Yeah.
Yeah, the way you put it, Pramod, it becomes very simple. But yeah, it was amazing. As you spoke about it, I mean, I've joined Protean 3 years back, but I could see the journey in front of my eyes. This is the company which built the tax systems, it built the pension system, and today it's a different world. I think the way you said it, I could virtually see it, how we got the RFP or the nomination, and we built the entire infrastructure. But today's world is different. So I agree with you, and that's very, very beautifully articulated. And today, the rest of the world is looking at similar thing. The governments are learning from this. They want to work at the foundational layer, what we are calling the infra layer.
Yeah.
But a question to you also.
And that's also a question, how does other countries
Yes,
adopt, right?
yes.
That was a question. And I think we are thinking this. Not all countries have the economy of scale that India has. Because we can dangle 1 billion people. Carrot. Even Google managed to, managed to convince the headquarters, the gods. Over there saying, there is something going on in India. Let's play the game, right? So it is very important that they, came in. And that may not exist in every country. We do see few countries, like Nigeria, Ethiopia, countries, Brazil, of course, large countries like that, having reasonable scale and capability thinking. So they might take their way of adoption would be taking the open source assets or digital public goods that we are putting out, saying our learnings, our knowledge, our specifications, our software, open source software components that they can use, but they will build their own. They might leverage open source stuff, but they build their own because they can, and they might want to because of the scale. We also have at least 75 countries that are actually a couple of less than 2 million, 5 million people. We have countries with 100,000 populations, 200,000, 300,000. That's like, right here, I think, 100,000 people, right, in India. So it's like, BKC alone is a whole country, right? So what do? It's not obvious that they can go through the same decade-long complex journey that India has gone through. So that's where, again, we are leaning back to the private ecosystem. Some of you and some of these guys, GCPs of the world, AWS or any of the hyperscalers or system integrators, consulting companies, to say, could we create package solutions that are subscribable for Pacific Islands? Because everybody has little population, but they all want an education, something to use education for. They want to give the skilling for their people. They want interoperable payments in their system, and they also worry about just giving it to one private vendor where the tech gets locked in. So as long as the technology and the open specification is open, but a packaged offering is necessary because they can't go through the whole thing of building your own institution just for 100,000 people or 500,000 people, right? So I think it is important that we lean on the private ecosystem. We must lean on the private ecosystem, 3 types of ecosystem: system integrator, consulting companies, and hyperscalers, to make sure that we do have SaaS-like subscribable offerings that allow OPEXification of some of these costs. Because it's easier for a country with 200,000, 500,000 people to say, oh, I'll put $1 per person, $5 per person, $10 per person. Can we get a DigiLocker, or can we get some of these in our system working, right? That's quite straightforward. If all of us put our mind together, we should be able to actually package it, give them a competitive offer, and maybe countries like India, and with the US as well, by the way, Quad, and now with French collaboration we have, we are going to create money pool for DPI adoption. That means we are going to create quite a large pool of money that is available for the private ecosystem to roll out DPIs in other countries. But it cannot go through the same pain of tiny countries writing RFPs from scratch, okay? It's not going to work out. So we have to compress the cost and compress the speed of rollout and convert it to OPEX, so that I can say, oh, our government might say, I'll give you $5 or $10 for the next 5 years. Just start using it. At that time, use what? We need offers from private ecosystem to say, I have a hosted UPI, or I have a hosted DigiLocker, or I have a hosted CoWIN equivalent, or whatever, right? Diksha and so on.
Pramod, very, very relevant, especially in the context of smaller countries. And I think the other thing which I would like you to also, extend your thinking and share with us, how do you connect the dots? Because I've heard you very often talk about saying the combinatorial power of the DPIs, because each one is not isolated. When we see ID today sitting as a foundational layer, but when you're doing ONDC, you're leaning on payments, you're leaning on ID. Similarly, other areas, health, education, and when you look at the infra layer, it is solving for discovery and trust. So how do you bring the combinatorial power, and how do you see these contributing into the new ODEs that even India is building and in the process as of now?
Yeah, I think one of the things we always find it hard, and it is even hard probably even for private industries, to bring everybody on the table and upfront agree on how we'll all work together. I think it is almost, collaboration is not natural, I think, for a lot of us. Because we have all kinds of reasons why we want to do it all ourselves and collaborate. And in government, we see this even more. It's not straightforward. One department won't talk to other department, right? It's not straightforward. Now, if that is not a bug, if that's a feature of the system, then we have to figure out how do you make interoperability and combinatorial possibilities. One of the things we have found is that when they design, let's say when healthcare designs or agri, we are doing agri right now, agri designs their agriculture infrastructure. Don't ask them to combine, everybody health, agriculture, education, let's all come together. Come on, man, nothing's going to happen, right? Nothing will move. But instead you tell them, can you make you unbundle what you're trying to do, create reusable blocks and allow a policy for reuse. So create reusable blocks, at least you do that yourself. Publish your own specs. Don't worry about who will use, we'll find other people to use it. And for agri, for example, we are doing farmer registry. That means agriculture, we are going to go through 40% of our country's agri, and we are going to create attested, qualified, digitally verifiable farmer and land and their produce, all crops, registrified. What is registry means? Electron EKYC. Now you can do an EKYC on a farmer. You can do an EKYC on their claims that I am a farmer having 2-acre land. Today, every system has to re-verify that. So imagine the possibility of a pre-verified and digitally verifiable registry. So that's how we build. So we ask each of those systems to create interoperable building blocks. Now, what happens suddenly is that a financial system now would say, oh, I used to lend to farmer and it used to be very costly because I have to do the entire verification, paper verification. Suddenly my underlying cost started getting disappeared. So that means I can do more lending. I can do less interest. Things like that start happening because the combinatorial innovation happened by market. Market innovates as long as we make it reusable. So we ask each department, think about what you can make it reusable for other people. That's all. Don't worry about collaboration and sitting up front and all that. I think that's the only way we have been building. So nobody had an idea of combinatorial innovation other than few of us who were part of everything, right? So we could see them coming together. But individually when DigiLocker was built, Meti said DigiLocker is my project, I'll do DigiLocker. What is the impact of DigiLocker credentialing in the long run was not necessarily, yeah, it doesn't matter. Don't try to do all that in complexity in the beginning. Yeah. Just get them to build one thing. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Now, Kiran, coming back to you, I think the big thing which caught everybody's imagination over the last, I would say, 1 year, generative AI, right? It's always been there, AI we've been speaking about, but it became plebeian. I mean, it became available to the common man to actually leverage it. Now, as we look at India, the government talks about building 17 national level stacks. The entire thing started way back. And then we are also saying in the next, 5-6 years, by 2030, we will have 10 large national open digital ecosystems going across justice, logistics. I'm taking the names of the one we rarely talk about, but then health, agriculture, all these areas are coming together. So how do you see Gen AI playing a role? We've also recently got into a partnership with Google to build a center of excellence. And the whole idea was, how do you bring Gen AI into DPI at an infrastructure level and create more use cases, more experiences? So your views on that would be very interesting to hear.
Will you allow me to sort of compliment and respond to some of the things that Dr. Varma raised, right? Before I respond to your question.
Absolutely.
So he spoke about collaboration. I think it's a huge compliment to whatever work that Dr. Varma and the team has done in building the infrastructure for a complex country like India. And I'm sort of reminded of what we as a hyperscaler did when we began building a platform, right? Think about scale. You don't get to scale by thinking about technology through the lens of just hardware provisioning, right? You think of scale through composable services. So the moment you spoke about building, DPI that brings many parts together, we were thinking of composable services. There are times when you have to actually innovate grounds up. That's how Kubernetes was born and open sourced to the world, right? To me, that analogy shouldn't have been sort of missed, right? It's the analogy that I would like to sort of harp on. Second, when you want to build for scale as a hyperscaler, you might have to build new database paradigms. Where would you find a database that is forever on, that is 24/7 available and rendering citizen services, right? So you might have to think out of the box. So the first point around collaboration, I think there is an opportunity for us to build as well as let it out to the community to use at large and for innovation to thrive. The second part that Dr. Varma mentioned was also about private innovation on public rails. You imagine the amount of profit pools that might have been created in this country alone in the last 5 years on the back of public infrastructure. Without sort of being provocative about it, I think there is an opportunity for some part of that profit pool to come back into fostering the public infrastructure, right? Give it back so that it grows to being better and far more usable for the others, right? That's another point that I wanted to mention. So let me come back to the question that you raised. Generative AI. It's almost like you're giving a full toss ball to a cricket batsman to put it out across the fence. And now generative AI is something that we love talking about. It's something that all of us love hearing about. So let me give a couple of minutes to sort of demystifying generative AI, because your question is about application of generative AI to DPI, okay? We think about DPI in 4 simple buckets. The first one is, can it help me create something new? Number 2, can it help me discover something which I am unable to discover in the traditional world, right? Third, can it help me summarize complex content? And fourth, can it help me automate processes in businesses or in government that earlier took either a lot of process or a lot of technology, or it took a lot of people to get done, right? So 4 parts: create, summarize, automate, discover. Simple way of looking at generative AI. People usually talk about LLMs, they talk about hallucination. I think we want to step away from that and say just 4 things, simple 4 things. And now let's apply generative AI to how it solves for DPI. We can take simple examples. I think this conference is all about financial services, so let me for a moment step away from financial services and think about other application areas. A good one that Mr. Suresh spoke about, and I'm taking liberally from what you and I spoke on Tuesday evening at the event at Taj Santa Cruz, which was that citizen services, right? Imagine the amount of complex documentation that the government throws out, right? If this scheme has to be consumed by a citizen, these are the eligibility criteria, a validity period of so and so, right? Complex amount of documentation. If I am a consumer, if I am a Kisan, and I want to know what is relevant to me, all I should be able to do is to ask a question in a conversational manner, and it should be able to summarize and say, this is all that is applicable for you. To me, that's the simplest and the most humane way of thinking about the application of generative AI on top of DPI, right? Number 1. Number 2, DPI doesn't get consumed by itself, like Dr. Varma said, right? It requires innovation to be delivered. But for innovation, the preamble or the prerequisite is education, awareness, right? So can generative AI create educational videos, for example, for a farmer or a common citizen to consume and therefore become more literate, more aware of services, and therefore go and consume it, right? So that's another application area. Now let's focus on something that you mentioned, health. You said health and something else coming together. It is perhaps a burning problem in India as a country of 1.2 billion people. Right? I don't know if the ratios are still good, but it says we have about or less than one doctor per thousand, not to sort of look into the urban-rural divide, but a ratio of one doctor per thousand Indians, right? That ratio is perhaps a little better in other comparable developing countries. You can use DPI and Dr. Varma perhaps is a guru at this, to bring health records, longitudinal health records of patients made available to every corner of this country. So if I'm sitting in Orissa, I should still be able to make my health records accessible to a doctor in Bridge Candy, right? As simple as that. But think about what GenAI can do as a 10x multiplier on it. It can perhaps look at the health records, privacy considerations taken into consideration, and say, here is the initial diagnosis and here is potentially the path for remedy for this patient, right? So we can think of huge impact for that generative AI can deliver. Last part, automation. I think there is dime a dozen opportunities for GenAI to solve for problems in how documents are read, interpreted, how documents are moved in a business process, everything to do with the government or the consumption of services that the government renders, right? So to me, the simplification of GenAI is really through the 4 buckets that I mentioned, and there could be infinite more. I mean, the one that we are seeing right now, an interesting one since you mentioned ONDC, commerce. Think of all the suppliers that we want to onboard or to be onboarded as network participants onto ONDC. If I am a silk sari weaver in Kanchipuram and all I have is a photograph of a sari, but I want to post it on a seller app on the ONDC network, GenAI should be able to enrich the catalog, write a narrative for the product, create variants in colors, and enhance the catalog. To me, that's a powerful way of bringing ONDC as a DPI to life and enrich the life of the supplier who wants to be onboarded onto ONDC as a network. I mean, we can think of thousands of examples like this, but I think we need to get a bit more grounded about where those application areas lie today.
No, thank you, Kiran. I think what you said got a lot of imagination going. I'm sure everybody is thinking about the applications, and that was the beauty we saw when we even did some of the exercises at the workshop you were talking about, and you could see this coming to life. You could think about something and you could have, pools of data coming and being put together in a legible manner, whether it is describing a product, whether it is putting together a, sort of a catalog of services. So I think these are amazing use cases. It's a very interesting discussion with these 2 gentlemen. We can go on for the day, but we have a shortage in time. So I would request if there are any questions from the audience, that would be good to hear some thoughts from the people around here.
While we get the mic, couple of things that on the Gen AI we might want to also think about. I think the layers that he talked about is very, very powerful. The DPI is enabling PHR, personal healthcare records, or ONDC commerce to happen at the core. So that's all it's doing at the bottom. But the value of PHR data, so much of healthcare data, if it cannot be interpreted, if it cannot be used, if it cannot be understood by patients and doctors, not the high-end doctors, at least the more common doctors, then the value is lost. So I think that the idea that you can create Gen AI on the edges to really enable the interpretation, understanding, knowledge, consumption, automation thereof, and so on is very, very powerful. And of course, attach that to Bhashini, our Indic language effort that we are doing, because 100 million people, beyond that English starts becoming impossible. We have 1.4 billion people. So we have to really get people to participate. We need Indic language. In a private company like Google are doing tremendous work. Microsoft is doing tremendous work. But I think some of the models, Google is also part of some of the AI for Bharat effort. Microsoft is part of that. But what he said, give back. So that giving back to open source community is key because barrier to innovation is very high for startups and innovation. So while Google finds its barrier being low because they're the best scientists in the world and the best data in the world, so they are sitting on tremendous power in one sense. It's not obvious to a health startup or a fintech startup how to go about doing this. So we also should look at some sort of democratization there to deal with how do we get more competition in the system going. And of course, we have to also worry about GenAI. One of the negative effect is also being on the information, disinformation and fake information side of it, which is going to just blow out of proportion given the multiple election, US, India, all coming in. So that's a worry that we need to deal with it.
Sure.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So after him, we'll be just able to take one question in paucity of time. So please.
I think the lesser focused area for GenAI application is also cybersecurity. Imagine the amount of data that DPI carries. With threats increasing, with threat actors increasing, actually there is a potential for GenAI to be applied to secure these rails, to secure the data at the edges. And it's a consideration well worth sort of thinking about.
And something crossing my mind, Pramod, when you were speaking, and Kiran likewise, also about responsible AI. Because that is going to be equally critical, because when you are talking about interpretation of health records, health data, how are you making sure that you are within the framework, right? And that's also going to be, maybe it's a topic for another day, but that is an equally important way in which this grows. But let's go over to the...
Thank you so much.
Just a concise question.
Sure.
Thank
Don't
you.
worry on this. Myself, Rajiv Malhan, I'm part of Aditya Birla Capital. So, Pramod, thank you so much for taking DPI where it is now, where it is not looking encouraging only for India, but to the entire world. So, though Kiran has mentioned, but just wanted to understand, how are we going to take it to the tier 2, tier 3 kind of population, where they can adapt it, understand it. Finance Minister has also mentioned about the digital literacy. Is there any way out? How can we, convey back to those people, this is the way we should, they should utilize it, and this is the way, the benefits which are available. Because this is a huge need which is available there, and they have the potential, they are technically literate, but how can we convey back to them?
Yeah, so I think if you look at our UPI is a classic example of people thinking, classic example of where people said who can make digital payments, smartphone and all that, I think completely changed, right? I mean, rural is no more rural. Now India, where is QR code not seen? I mean, it's just amazing how much digital can penetrate. Because fundamentally it comes from two things we have done. One is the connectivity that we have enabled, the geo effect. This is geo center anyway. So the geo effect has been tremendous for collapsing the cost of connectivity and cheap Android phones and so on. The ecosystem has done a brilliant job in connecting the people. But on top of that, now with UPI, I think that's the beauty of DPI approach. DPI approach simply doesn't require one entity to solve all these complex problems, because no one entity can solve what you're asking. So the question we have to ask is, are there entrepreneurs who are actually going to tier 2, tier 3? How can we enable those entrepreneurs? What is the cost and friction they are facing? Why are they not going? If government has to serve the poor, it's like saying, no, for poor people we'll do the separate highway. For rich people, this highway, right? That doesn't make any sense at all. We are on the same, we all use the same highway. Whether you drive a Benz or drive, any other car or auto rickshaw, we are going the same road. It is key for us to be able to actually create, but allows various innovation. So real question we should be asking is that what is stopping? What is stopping entrepreneurs from going, digitizing? Because aspirations are there, they're connected. Almost everyone has a smartphone now, every family at least.
Potential is there.
Every and 5 more years, fast forward, 2030, we are just going to be more connected. So I think the real key is what is stopping. And that is what a lot of us think about it. What friction can we remove from the system? Friction for innovation, friction for acquisition, customer acquisition, friction for processing cost. How can we dramatically reduce that cost so that you can go actually solve that problem?
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, let's humbly thank our esteemed panelists for joining us. A big round of applause and salute for all the work you do.